Today we're going to talk about a long-term approach to fitness for those interested in joining Special Forces. Again, if you watched the previous video, we talked about this applying to someone, generally speaking, who's about to enter college. So a 4-year approach to training in general terms. But if you have 2 years, 1 year, or even if you're not going to college, I think you can take some tidbits from this and find your way to success. So 4 years of fitness prep is an amazing opportunity. It's also a really long time. So when you're thinking about this from like the 30,000 foot view, there are going to be ebbs and flows. You're going to have periods of time where you're just nailing everything, and then other periods of time where life gets in the way or your study abroad gets in the way a little bit. That's okay. We'll give you some approaches to take or to think about for when those times come. So if you're a full-time student, you should have access to a campus gym or multiple gyms. Potentially some strength and conditioning input from strength and conditioning staff or students, be they undergrad or graduate students who are in the strength and conditioning world of study. And you'll also have near endless online resources, which can be a good and bad thing depending on your personality. Try not to get the paralysis by analysis, just pick something and go with it. Pick your path, make adjustments along the way, but the big focus here is building your strength and aerobic foundation, especially those first 3 years. And then your military prep or your military specific prep can wait until the final 6 to 12 months. If you've built a really, really strong aerobic and strength base, then you might only really need to focus for like 8 to 12 weeks on the military specific stuff. But you're going to base that off what you know about yourself, your strengths and weaknesses, and the specific pipeline you're wanting to take. My background going into this was I had a soccer background in high school. I had a really high aerobic base and like a decent but limited, probably on the lower end of a strength base. I had exposure to the basic lifts, so your squat, bench, press, deadlifts, vertical and horizontal pulling, a little bit of Olympic lifting, as well as a bunch of speed and agility work. So I followed my first few years of college a sport-specific training for lifting. Initially, that was the soccer programming that I had and knew. I had a few programs for that. And then that transitioned into a football-specific program, mainly because my buddy from high school played football out of college, and he gave me the online username and password for his college strength and conditioning programming. I followed, I think, like a linebacker program for a little while, and then I switched to like a defensive back program. It was good, pretty well rounded. Basic lifts plus a few Olympic lifts mixed in there. As far as cardio and how I maintained that through college, it was mainly just intermittent running. I didn't have to focus a lot on cardio to maintain it, so I could do 1 to 2 times a week, maintain my base, even make some improvements along the way. So I would do like a medium distance, so like maybe a 5K, and then interval training, so 400s to 1,000 meter repeats. And then the occasional pickup soccer game. And that was good enough for me to never really have to work too hard at running and to jump right into the military specific training towards the end of my senior year. My military specific training took place the second semester of my senior year, right after I got back from studying abroad in Chile. This was before I ever signed a contract. I already knew the direction I wanted to go, which was Special Forces. I had a decent understanding of the physical requirements for that, as well as just the Army fitness test. So I trained for maybe 3 months before I ever signed anything, and then did my initial like PT screening. I used Stu Smith's Complete Guide to Navy SEAL Fitness, and then I added the 12 Weeks to Buds program right in the build up to leaving for basic training. And the only modification I had to make to that was I substituted all the swims with rucks. I think even I kept most of the distances the same. I didn't go crazy on rucking. I did maybe 1 8-miler, and then everything else was like 3 to 5 mile range. Worked great. That was the advice I got from Stu Smith when I emailed him back in the day. And then back in the day, he was kind of the only one doing the tactical fitness prep. It was great. I had an opportunity to meet him and thank him for that, I think like 10 years after I joined, so that was pretty cool. One thing to keep in mind when it comes to your military or selection specific training, if you're going to the Army through like an 18 X-ray program, you're still going to have 5 to 6 months from when you leave for the military basic training until you attend selection or selection prep. And that's being generous as far as going immediately into selection prep. I didn't have really any breaks between my training from basic training through the end of the Q course. I think the most I might have had was like a weekend, or like I had one Christmas break that fell at the end of one course and the beginning of another. So you're gonna have some time before you ever get there, and you're gonna need to be able to have enough knowledge to maintain or improve your fitness, because if you go into basic training super strong and fit, you're gonna get less strong and fit. So you're gonna have to kind of ramp back up during, I don't know the sequencing these days, but you kind of had to ramp back up during airborne school. I went from airborne immediately to SOPC, and SOPC, the Special Operations Preparation course, did a fantastic job getting us ready for selection, both at a fitness level as well as individual land navigation. So when it comes to your selection specific training, just some things to keep in mind. The physical demands are pretty straightforward. You need to be able to run and ruck known and unknown distances, heavy on the rucking side. You're gonna need to do pull-ups. I think they're doing the Army Combat Fitness test instead of doing the log and rifle PT like they did back when I went through. Not 100% sure. So just make sure you can max those as well. That's where your strength component is gonna come in, especially with like deadlifts and the power component for some of the medicine ball throws and whatnot. You're gonna have to do a bunch of different carries, and you're also gonna kind of focus on like a suitcase carry with your dummy rifle. That's how I would carry it during the rucks and during land nav, where you just grip the handguard and go, rotating hands. You need to be able to do rope climbs. I think they still do the Nasty Nick obstacle course, I'm not sure, and I think there is a rope climb screening at the beginning. That's mainly a technique thing, so once you figure out the technique, rope climbs don't become super taxing unless you're doing a lot of high repetitions back to back. So grip strength is going to play a part of that, rope climbs, rifle carries, but then also in team week, your grip's going to fail, but just add some of that into it for sanity's sake. And then obviously you're going to be doing a ton of land navigation with a ruck, so you need to have a strong rucking base so that you can think and make good decisions while you're moving through the woods, and not having that big green tick on your back suck the life out of you to where you start getting sloppy and make poor decisions with route selection and attack points. Land navigation is going to be its own thing. We'll talk about that in a different video. When you're choosing a selection prep program, be aware of those that are really barbell centric or overemphasize the strength training component with weights. Strength training should absolutely be a part of your selection prep or your military prep, but don't get too distracted by that to where it's strength training cardio versus like cardio strength, or maybe an even balance. I saw plenty of good dudes who failed the initial PT test to selection and get the boot on day one because they got lazy in their prep, and they could ruck all day with no issues, but they failed a PT test because they didn't get their push-ups or sit-ups. I'm not sure what SOPC looks like today, but if it's anything like when I went through, it will set you up for success at selection. My class crushed it. I think we had something like 92 out of the 97 guys from my SOPC class get selected, and I think most of the guys who did not get picked up either failed the PT test on day one or got like psych boarded out. So it should be a good thing if it's still around in the same form or similar form to when I went through. I think regular Army guys can attend SOPC now along with the 18 X-rays, but I'm not 100% sure. If that's the case, it's great, and gives more guys a solid foundation before they make their way to Special Forces selection, Special Forces assessment and selection. Okay, so getting back to building your base, here's what I think is important. First, you need to understand your body type and how that relates to your fitness. I'm naturally small and good at running. My resting weight, if I didn't train, would probably be around 145. I'm 5'9". I'm sitting at maybe 170, 175 today, but that's through forcing myself to go to the gym. Not forcing, I love it, but mainly forcing myself to eat. I'm a chronic undereater. Soft guys come in all shapes and sizes. You're gonna see big, strong dudes in the military and at selection. I call them the pack mules. They tend to do very well with long-range movement under load, but selection programs that have a high run volume can be pretty brutal for them. On the other side, you have the smaller dudes with more limited strength. They can, like myself, we can get beat down under a ruck pretty easily or have a poor showing during team week just due to the strength component required for some of the odd objects you have to move. So you want to adjust your training based on your known strengths and weaknesses. When it comes to rucking, I always think of it as a percentage of your total body weight. So a guy who's 225 carrying a 65-pound ruck, That's around 30% of their body weight, so it's not insignificant, but it's also not huge. If you're 150 pounds carrying a 65-pound ruck, that's pushing up into the 40-ish percentage range, I think like 42. And that can get taxing quickly, that extra 10, 12%. If you're under 150 pounds, that percentage goes up even more. So what do? I would take a hybrid training approach. This has been around for a long time. It's kind of regaining popularity, which I think is a good thing, but it needs to be done intelligently. So a hybrid approach is not taking a full-on strength program and then mashing it together with like a full, marathon running program, and then just doing both at high volume and destroying yourself as far as recovery is concerned. It needs to be smartly designed. And there are a few companies that have everything from like foundational program through like selection specific training plans, and a handful of things in between. I'm going to point out a few that I think are quality. Some of them I have used in the past. Some of them I might use in the future just for fun. These are all from former special operations guys, so former Green Berets and former Navy SEALs. It's not necessary to use somebody with that background, but I think it does give you a good understanding of what the expectations are as far as performance and what you need to do. And then obviously these are folks who have done it successfully, so it's not a bad place to start. The first one is Terminator training. That's from Kevin Smith. He's a former SF guy with an understanding of what does and doesn't matter when it comes to training. He has a lot of hybrid specific stuff as well as some selection specific training programs. This is where I would look if you're trying to get into Army Special Forces. His YouTube and Instagram page have pretty fantastic resources as far as everything from nutrition to training. And he also talks about like that gap or the timeline between finishing up basic training in infantry school until you actually get to a selection class, and what you're going to need to do to sort of maintain or improve your lost fitness and strength in that time frame between, which could be 5 to 6 months or even more. For those who are going to go into something like Navy SEALs, combat controllers, or PJs, so a training pipeline that has a more water-based component, I would look at Performance First. That's from Jeff Nichols, former SEAL. Same thing, he's got BUDS prep, he has hybrid training, he has like strength programs with a running program that is designed to be paired with it. He has a couple different versions of those. He also has a nutrition PDF ebook that I don't have it, but it looks pretty quality as far as eating for performance. Another guy I would look at is Stu Smith. He's been around forever. He's a former SEAL, has a long track record of getting guys into special operations. And yeah, I think you can't go wrong with one of those three. If you want to look for somebody outside the special operations world, again, it's not necessary to limit yourself to a strength and conditioning program designed by a former special operations guy. Alec Blennis has a lot of good stuff for hybrid training. But one pro, I think, to using a former SOF person as your sort of programmer is that it's going to give you an idea of what you need to be able to do from a physical performance standpoint. Now, we're looking at this from a 4-year approach to training, so you have a lot of time to get this started, but I would caution you against waiting until that final year or two before you start to dive in. The earlier you start, the longer an on-ramp you have to dial in your adaptations, prevent injury, kind of a nice slow build versus trying to do it all at once at the last minute. You can build your strength, your aerobic capacity, and you can also refine your rucking, running, and swimming techniques. And that's important because those are, believe it or not, technique-heavy components, rucking surprisingly so. If you have like a gap in your knowledge as far as technique is concerned, be it running, rucking, or swimming, specifically with swimming, I would try and go do an in-person training session with Stu Smith or Jeff Nichols, or I think Stu Smith does like remote coaching for your combat swimmer stroke. Those are, I think, invaluable, especially if you're going to go the BUDS route or CCT or PJs. Now, as far as training bias is concerned, again, keep in mind what your baseline strengths and weaknesses are, but I think aerobic capacity should definitely be biased maybe a little bit more than just the strength component, especially in the later phases. So running should be easy for you. If you have a bias towards raw strength or cardio capacity, I would go for like a moderate strength level and a really high cardiovascular capacity. I think that's a winning combination. Another aspect I would pay attention to is mobility and flexibility, and I would not neglect this. So that means full range of motion during your lifts, under control, and more specific flexibility training. You don't need to have full-on splits or like a back bend to a bridge, but your body will thank you for the range of motion. It helps with injury prevention, in my opinion, especially as you get older. The more I stretch, the better I feel. With my programming that I'm doing right now and the one that I'm going to start here, which is like a 16-week hybrid program for upland hunting in the mountains, flexibility is still 2 days a week, and that's not going to change. One thing to keep in mind when it comes to stretching is you should know the difference between stretching for recovery or rejuvenation versus stretching for an increased range of motion. So that's like a yoga type of practice versus loaded stretching, which is just using weights to increase your range of motion. They are two very different things. They have a very different impact on your body. I would say the systemic stress and recovery needs for loaded stretching, which is the type of stretching I like to do, those needs are much greater than if I were to do like a relaxing yoga session. Where I would look for my flexibility foundations would be Emmett Lewis, Modern Methods of Mobility, and I would look at his Flexibility Foundations course. He also has a lot of stuff online, as does Tom Merrick, who is the Bodyweight Warrior. He has a lot of follow-on routines you can do and a lot of insight on everything from more recovery stretching and loaded stretching. So we've talked a little bit about selection-specific training, a general hybrid approach to training. Now I want to talk about fitness while you're studying abroad, because as per the previous video, I think that is a mandatory 1, if not 2 semesters during your college experience. Your access to a gym and all the great equipment is going to depend on the country in which you study. When I was overseas 24 years ago, that really wasn't available to me, nor was a common sense gym membership plan where you could buy 4 months of a membership. For whatever reason, that's just at times incomprehensible to foreign countries. I think that has changed. I hope that has changed, but prepare accordingly. In the same vein, you're going to encounter this when you're on deployments. So you might be in a very austere location where you're just going to flip tires, do some sprints, and use ammo cans and milk jugs to train. Or you might be somewhere you have access to a full gym. So where would I focus if I were headed overseas today? First thing I would look at is body weight calisthenics. Second would be cardio. You have plyometrics, which are a great way to do lower body training for power while you're traveling, and then mobility training. As far as rucking, it wouldn't be a huge focus of mine. I would just, and this is what I did, I just threw a backpack on, put water in it, a few layers of clothes if it was necessary, and a pocket dictionary, and I explored the city on foot. Make sure you bring a map. Try and walk everywhere all the time as much as you can. One nice thing about a lot of foreign countries is that they are very pedestrian friendly, so you can get around and do a nice area familiarization throughout your time there. Just be careful. There are good areas and there are bad areas. If you find yourself in an unsafe place, you'll get to sprinkle in a little extra running until you get yourself to safety. So as far as calisthenics, why I think these are a great option, it's a low equipment requirement and you're generally able to do calisthenics most anywhere. A lot of foreign countries, if you're near a park, they'll have sometimes like a little calisthenics training area, or at a minimum, they might have some pull-up bars, some monkey bars. You can get a decent amount of training in that way. As far as gear, I would keep it simple. So I would pack a set of rings and then this thing called a Nord stick, which is a great way to train your hamstrings when you don't have access to a full gym. Hamstring training, for whatever reason, is one that I always struggled with when traveling. Just low equipment, just never found a good way to do it. Picked up a Nord stick and I use it all the time when I'm traveling. There's some cool different hacks to set it up, for everything from under your truck tire to under a doorway. I think it's a great tool, and it's like 30 bucks. Some nice to haves would be a few sets of bands. This is more for like shoulder rehab and prehab, and then high repetition. So like a couple sets of 50 to 100 band curls and tricep extensions. That's to help stave off elbow tendonitis when you're doing a high volume of pulling work, or if you're working towards a one-arm chin-up. That's when I first started using it. Another nice to have would be a couple sets of the Captains of Crush for grip strength. They pack light, they're great to use. You know, get like one that's a little lighter and easier for you to use as your warm-up, and then a heavier one. So like maybe a trainer and then a number 1, or a trainer number 1 and a 1.5. When it comes to calisthenics, I'm somebody who bores easily with just a bunch of push-ups, pull-ups, and sit-ups. So you can start to dip your toes if you want to in the more advanced calisthenics. So that's like handstand push-up progressions, planche progressions, both straight arm and planche push-ups, and then front and back levers, as well as like lever rows. They can get you crazy strong, make bodyweight training a little more enjoyable and less stale, but there's a high skill component to all of those things. So you want to have a little bit of education about how to progress through those intelligently, because I think the risk of injury is a little higher with those. And while we're not totally averse to injury, we want to minimize it as much as possible. Good baseline resources for the more advanced bodyweight calisthenics would be fitness FAQs. They have a great YouTube page. They also have a number of like PDF training programs that you can purchase from them. If you grab a couple of those, I would look at Body by Rings, and then I would look at Limitless Legs, which is a bodyweight lower body training. I bought the Limitless Legs. I've used that while I was living out of my truck and hunting a lot. But his progressions along with that Nord stick got me to a full Nordic. So I'm now up to like 8 to 11 reps depending on the day, which is pretty awesome. I struggled with those for a few years. If you want to mess around and get even deeper into like the handstand specific skill work, like the handstand push-ups, or even just straight arm handstands, I would look at Handstand Factory. That's Emmett Lewis and Michael Christensen. They have everything from getting a basic 2-arm handstand, your handstand push-ups, your press to handstands, all the way to 1-arm handstand training. Handstands are by no means necessary to get into special operations, but they're a good circus trick, and they're also a nice way to build like your vertical pushing strength, as well as your static arm strength in general. I used to train under Emmett for a couple years, and it was a lot of fun, and his stuff works. Emmett also has a slightly different take on a lower body training program that's body weight only. It's called 36 Legs of Berlin. An element of it is strength, and it's also a lot of flexibility that works in there. It's stances and kicking drills that are based on like traditional Chinese martial arts. It's a 36-day program. It has a lot of breath work involved with it, and it's something I plan on toying with later this year. I did some stance work with Emmett when I was training under him. It was cool and surprisingly more difficult than I expected. So it could be something worth checking out. I'll put all the links in the description. As far as ruck specific training, if you're gonna try and train this when you're overseas, backpacking is pretty big, especially in Latin America, and I think in Europe too. So if you're walking around with a giant backpack, you're not going to be totally out of place. You might look a little weird, but if you don't want to do that, you can take the approach of like military athlete. I think it's now the Mountain Tactical Institute, which is using step ups. So I think it's like a 15 to 17 inch step that they recommend, and you ramp up from like 100 steps to like 500 or 600 plus over time, and then you can also begin to load those with weight in a backpack or a vest as you go. It's good if you're in an area that doesn't have a lot of elevation. If you are in a mountainous region, I would find a trail and hike it or run it on the weekends, one that has a nice elevation gain. So for example, when I was in Bogota, Colombia on embassy duty, they had a place called Monserrate, and it was like stone stairs that went, I think the starting elevation was around 8,000 feet. I'm not sure what the elevation gain was, but it was significant enough. And every Saturday I would run/walk the stairs. It took about 30 to 45 minutes, and all I would do was each week try and get a faster time than the week before. The biggest overall thing you should keep in mind, in my view, while you're overseas studying is to just try and minimize your strength and aerobic loss as best as you're able. You're probably going to lose some unless you have access to a full gym suite, and that's okay. But you don't want to lose everything. So endure the 1 to 2 semesters you're there. Don't stress about the losses if you have any. And then get back to your hybrid training and into your military specific training once you get back home. It's not a big deal. You're gonna have to learn how to bounce back after some losses anyways. Now, I'm not gonna go into nutrition really at all. This isn't my background. I have my approaches that work and have worked for me over time, but I think there are folks who are way smarter and intelligent than me. You can look at Performance First with Jeff Nichols. He has like an online PDF nutrition program that you can download and buy. I think that would be a good resource. I believe Terminator Training also has some nutrition specific guidance. The biggest key here is you're gonna be eating for performance over aesthetics. If you're training properly, the aesthetics will come. So I wouldn't stress about that, but performance fueling is gonna be just a little bit different than if you're trying to like shrink down and cut for a bodybuilding competition. When it comes to body fat percentage for folks, my general guidance is somewhere between 10 and 15%. I'm probably about 15% right now. When I went to selection, I was probably 10% or sub 10%. Not because I was trying to be, it was just because the output requirement for things like SOPSI was greater than the caloric input that I could do. You'll be okay if you're a little bit above or a little bit below. I would just caution you against getting too low in body fat, so into those single digits. You can still perform well, but it's a little harder when your fueling is not ideal, like it will be in selection. You're limited on food, you can't bring supplements, at least when I went through. And you tend to get beat down a little faster. So that's all I have for the fitness component. Again, it's general concepts and then pointing you towards useful resources that I would use today if I were starting this process from zero. I still use a hybrid training approach. I'm about to start a new one, not this coming week, but the following. I'll add a link to that so you can download it if you want to as a PDF. It's free, but it'll give you at least an idea of maybe what a decent, or we'll just say mediocre, training program would look like. If you want to use it, go for it. I'm going to use it, probably make some tweaks along the way. Again, it's programmed specifically for me. So that means, strength base, upper lower body, cardio capacity, aerobic capacity, as well as some loaded flexibility in there because that's something that's important for me. I will probably tweak and adjust volume based on my needs. Again, I think the first 8 weeks has 3 days of cardio. The second 8 weeks has 3 to 4 days of cardio. I will probably stick to about 3 days a week just because I don't need to do as much to make improvements, but adjust it based off your needs and let me know if it works for you. If it sucks, I'm sorry. I don't really care. As long as it works for me, I'm good. But hope this was insightful. Biggest thing, just stay consistent with your training. You're gonna have peaks and valleys, but as long as you're doing something throughout those 4 years, you should be all right and setting yourself up for success. If you find that you absolutely hate physical training and can't keep yourself accountable, probably a good indicator that Special Forces is not for you. But hopefully that's not the case. Thanks.